By slamming the brakes on financial firm Ant Group's record-setting IPO, Beijing's communist regime reminds the Chinese people do not refute the Communist Party. That's no matter how rich you are or how obedient you've been. China's famous Three Gorges Dam has finally been approved. It comes as a surprise, as the dam has already been in use for 8 years. Some Chinese vendors have lost their only way of making a living. Many express concern for the future, but they've received little acknowledgment from local officials. That's after authorities took away their shop units. The U.S. takes another step towards decoupling from China. The nonprofit College Board will soon end its partnership with a Chinese government agency. And a German man spent 7 years in a Chinese prison. He describes how prisoners are exploited for cheap labor to make money for the communist regime. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Beijing is making an example out of Jack Ma by slamming the brakes on his Ant Group's record-setting IPO. It's a reminder to Chinese business people, no matter how rich you are or how obedient you've been, you'd better not refute the Chinese Communist Party.
It was supposed to be a win-win situation for Ant Group and China's Communist Party elites. Ant Group, backed by Chinese billionaire Jack Ma, was set to raise $37 billion from its dual listing in Shanghai and Hong Kong. The Chinese regime would win the reputation of biggest IPO in history from a company under its rule, an excuse to claim Hong Kong is still a prosperous financial city despite its bloody suppression of the city's freedom, and for the communist elites and state-owned firms that have already put their money in Ant Group.
Let the ordinary investors come in, so China's ready elite capital or the state capital, they can take advantage of the opportunity to cash in. Of course, this was the plan from the beginning, but no one expected that Jack Ma would suddenly say something crazy.
China affairs commentator Qin Peng said Jack Ma overestimated the Communist Party's tolerance of different opinions. This is the Shanghai Bond Summit. 2 weeks before the planned IPO, Jack Ma made his fateful speech.
China does not have any systematic financial risk because Chinese finance basically does not have a system. China has a risk called the lack of a financial system.
This is not just a slap in the face of Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan, who had just warned at the same summit that China should avoid systemic risk, especially risk caused by new financial technologies, hinting at Ant Group. The comment also mocked the entire Chinese Communist Party. And that comes with consequences. On Monday, top Chinese financial regulators summoned Jack Ma. Then Beijing slammed the brakes on Ant Group's record-setting IPO.
The reason the CCP is dressing down Jack Ma is to set an example of him and warn other business people. Let them remember who the real boss is. It is the Communist Party. It's Xi Jinping. You guys should not even try to sing a different tune. Don't even hold thoughts of that. This is the CCP's way of consolidating its authority.
The suspension sent shock waves across China. A movie clip had gone viral on Chinese social media, where Jack Ma played a kung fu master but still has to apologize to the police. This despite Ant Group and Jack Ma having been pretty obedient to Beijing's orders.
Whether it's handing over data, or cooperating with the CCP's politicians, or cooperating with the CCP's overseas expansion, and including the country's digital currency, Ant Group has been very obedient in these regards.
As for the company's future, whether the IPO is just delayed or permanently cancelled, Qin said it all depends on the Chinese Communist leader.
It doesn't depend very much on whether it's good for the enterprise or good for the country as a whole. It depends very much on Xi Jinping's personal will and the game that he's playing with those powerful communist capitalists behind Ant Group.
He said the drama will certainly disappoint investors who have been betting on China. Normally, investors look for predictability and consistency, which is secured by rule of law. Qin said China is everything but that.
The problem with the Chinese government is precisely that it intervenes too much, and a lot of the authorities' actions are not in accordance with the law, but to a large extent depends on the officials' arbitrary decisions or some unexpected events.
But it remains to be seen how much this will affect Wall Street's judgment on China.
Because as long as there's money to be made, Wall Street capital, the investment banks, the law firms, the accounting firms, and so on, they'll still go for the profit, even though it may undermine the existing market mechanism in the U.S., or even national security. Because we know Ant Group, in fact, will also affect the future of America's national security.
The Trump administration has reportedly been weighing sanctions on the Chinese company. Ant Group has helped Beijing develop the so-called social credit system, a massive surveillance system where every behavior of the Chinese is captured digitally. It also invested in tech companies that enforce the Communist Party's massive surveillance and crackdown on ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
China's famous Three Gorges Dam is back in the spotlight, but this time it's not because of flooding. Instead, it's over a more unexpected announcement. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
Chinese authorities announced the Three Gorges Dam passed the quality inspection last Sunday. It's unexpected news as the project's construction first started over 20 years ago, and it's already been in use for the last 8 years. The announcement marks its formal completion. State media reports the dam passed all tests and was approved for acceptance last Sunday. But Chinese authorities have been unusually quiet over the acceptance, a rare response for a project of this size. The regime considers the dam a major political project and has poured almost $40 billion into it. There have been no reports of a ceremony to mark its completion, something high-level politicians would be expected to attend. The only attention the news has gotten came from several state media reports. The quiet response also stands in major contrast to the project's start, when China's then premier attended a ceremony to mark when the ground was first broken for its construction. High-level officials appear to be distancing themselves from the project. Some China watchers say that's because they don't want to take the blame should something go wrong with the dam. Controversy and questions have been on the rise over the dam's quality. Authorities have refuted all criticism, but changed their tones over the years. When the dam first went into operation, state media claimed that it could withhold the worst flooding in 10,000 years. Later, they changed the claim to 1,000 years, then to 100 years, suggesting their confidence in the dam has declined. In 2010, state media quoted officials saying that people can't put their confidence in the dam in terms of flood control. There are also other worrying signs. The structure's main body was completed in 2006. But it wasn't until 2014 that authorities initiated a quality acceptance process. No reports are available from the years following. That's up until last Sunday, when state media reported the project was finally approved. Juliet Song, NTD News.
A set of commercial kiosks in a northeastern province were suddenly removed without warning. They were run by people with disabilities and other vulnerable people who are now concerned over how they will make a living.
A district government of Qiqihar City in the northeastern province of Heilongjiang suddenly removed dozens of commercial units without warning. The units had been operating there for over 20 years. The vendors were people with disabilities or those who were vulnerable. Many relied on the units to make a living. The authorities had provided no notice or proper paperwork before the units were dismantled, and there are no plans for compensation. The atmosphere grew tense on Tuesday when trucks drove in the market. There, with the order from the administrative team, or Chengguan, 22 units were immediately taken down. They were believed to have been an investment project initiated by the local government many years ago, and the government at the time had invited the vendors to run the shop units, with most of them having stayed until the present day. The vendors questioned the absence of government documents about the removal of the units.
They've been here for 20 plus years, around 24 or 5 years. Chenguans are tearing them down. They informed us, no stalls tomorrow. Isn't this forced demolition? They don't have government papers.
The actions of the Chengguan shocked and scared the vendors. Miss Meng, a vendor in the market for many years, was still shaking during our phone interview.
A bunch of gangs came this morning and demolished our kiosks. There were 50 to 60 Chengguan and many plainclothes police. They're like gangsters. There were 70 to 80 people.
She was very upset and did not know how she and many other families like her own could survive without this income source. For many of the vendors, it was their only source of income.
Among us, there are laid-off workers and those out of jobs. I need to raise 2 kids and a senior. A widow here supports her kid in college on her own. That's basically the situation.
She complained that nobody seems to care. She said they had been to the city hall and district government, but no official responded. The video shot at the scene shows the conflict between the vendors and the Chengguan. People can be heard saying the Chengguan are government-employed thugs. Some said the government itself is a triad. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
China's premier is facing embarrassment. This over something that happened to him and the officials accompanying him during an inspection of one city's living conditions.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang visited a city in China's Henan province on Wednesday. A local resident could be heard loudly crying for help that echoed throughout the residential buildings. She shouted repeatedly, "Injustice." The specifics of why she was yelling could not be confirmed. Often local Chinese officials ignore residents' grievances and they have few places to go to get justice. As a result, it's common to see residents shouting out how they feel at high-ranking officials when they visit. A forced home demolition victim told Radio Free Asia that people shout injustice to state leaders because there are no channels for them to express complaints. And those that do receive trouble from local authorities. A similar incident happened in March during the epidemic in Wuhan. During a visit to a residential compound by Chinese Vice Premier Sun Chunlan, residents started yelling complaints from inside their apartment buildings to vent their frustrations. One woman shouted out her window that the visit was staged by the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. Someone else shouted, "The vegetables we commoners eat are all overpriced." This was around the time of Wuhan's lockdown, when food prices were rising in the city. A local resident explained to us that everything officials saw during their inspection tour was cherry-picked and fake. The officials did not visit inside the buildings where the hallways were filthy and cluttered. They also said on the day of the visit, the property management wouldn't let the residents go downstairs and had arranged for volunteers to pretend to deliver food to them.
U.S.-based nonprofit College Board says it will end its partnership with a Chinese government agency at the end of the year. College Board administers AP and SAT exams. Scores from those tests often factor into U.S. college admissions. This move comes amid growing concerns about China's influence in the U.S. education system. Last month, 7 Republican senators wrote a letter to College Board CEO. They asked him to explain the group's financial relationship with Hanban, an office under Beijing's Ministry of Education. It's responsible for overseeing Confucius Institutes around the world. The institutes serve as educational partnerships between schools in China and abroad, and have been known to promote the ideas and culture of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. The senators asked whether the Chinese regime has influenced test development in the United States. The College Board says it's received an annual grant from Hanban since 2006, but will let the agreement expire at the end of this year. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has decided not to ban Chinese-made drones. Congressman Jim Banks expressed his concern over the issue. In a letter to the chamber, he described the decision as a hasty dismissal of proven national security risks. He's urging the chamber to re-examine its stance. That's because the drone makers, especially Dajian Innovations or DJI, are connected to the Chinese Communist Party. A 2017 memo from the Los Angeles Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement stated that DJI is providing critical infrastructure and law enforcement data to the Chinese government. In his letter, Banks says the drones pose a present national security threat and require an immediate executive and/or legislative response. A recent report by the chamber argued against imposing country of origin restrictions on China. The group said such moves would damage the economy and wouldn't be beneficial to the United States. Banks told the Epoch Times in a statement that the drone issue should be handled by Congress, adding that the security concerns are bipartisan. A man in Melbourne has become the first person charged under Australia's 2018 foreign interference laws. The 65-year-old Di San Duang belongs to several groups connected to the Chinese regime. He faces charges for preparing to commit foreign interference. That's in violation to the country's Espionage and Foreign Interference Bill passed in 2018. The maximum penalty is 10 years in jail. The charges come after a year-long investigation into Duang's relationship with a foreign intelligence body. It was conducted by the Counter-Foreign Interference Task Force and led by Australia's Federal Police and Australia's Security Intelligence Organisation, or ASIO. The ASIO said in its annual report, almost every sector of Australian society is a potential target of foreign interference, and the threat manifests itself in different but equally unacceptable ways. Duang is involved in a number of groups connected to the Chinese regime in Australia. As president of the Oceania Federation, he personally presented a $37,000 check to Australia's Federal Minister Alan Tudge at the Royal Melbourne Hospital back in June. The investigation is ongoing. Duang is currently out on bail. He's due in court again next March. In his first interview with an English-language media outlet, a German citizen talks about his 7.5 years in a Chinese prison, where he experienced forced labor and torture. In the second part of our three-part series, Robert Rota describes how prisoners in China are exploited by cheap labor to make money for the CCP. NTD's Germany correspondent Christian Watchen reports.
Robert Roeder spent 7 years and 7 months in a Chinese prison from 2011 to 2018. Like all inmates at Dongguan Prison in the southern Chinese province of Guangdong, Roeder was made to do forced labor.
You are a forced laborer. You cannot refuse to work, otherwise you get punished, and the punishment is severe.
Every morning they had to march in lockstep to the factory building, which was inside the prison walls. Their workday began at 7 a.m. and lasted at least 9 hours. Sometimes they had to work 7 days a week. His work was to produce choke coils. For that, he had to wrap 6 feet of copper wire around an iron ring. He often witnessed prisoners' eyes being injured from not wearing safety goggles. He said he felt himself slowly turning into a human machine whose only job was to function and deliver. He was not Robert Roeder anymore, but prisoner number 441-802-7614.
The target is to create robots out of you who just, they say, go left, you go left, work, work, go right, go right. So no more self-thinking, just become a machine for them to create money.
Work was organized into a point system to squeeze the most out of each prisoner.
They will give you working targets each day and for each month that you must reach. For example, you can make 1,000 points. Next month, you must make 1,200 and 1,300. So they will increase it until you reach your full capacity. And then you must stay on that level.
If he got enough points at the end of the month, Roeder earned 20 yuan, or about $3 per month, which he could use to buy things. If he didn't make his working target, he was punished. No monthly phone call home, less money to buy things, and social pressure from fellow inmates. In the summer of 2018, international politics suddenly had a tangible impact on his life and that of his fellow forced laborers. It was when the U.S. government started to impose additional tariffs of 25% on certain Chinese goods in response to the CCP's forced transfer of American technology and intellectual property.
It was a great day for us prisoners because suddenly the work stopped. They had no more, nothing to produce anymore. So the police became very nervous, and they were open and frankly to us and said, because of Donald Trump's import tariffs of 25%, we don't have any work right now. So we still had to go to factory to sit there, but we hadn't to do anything, you know. It was holiday for us.
Some factories on his block had to shut down, and others never fully recovered from the tariffs, at least not at the time he was released. He said guards feared losing control, since without work they could not pay prisoners any more money for cigarettes or extra food. Reuters said the factories at every level of production were run by prisoners, from logistics to quality control. The managers were prisoners too, some of whom were factory owners before. The police were there to supervise production and to make sure no one stepped out of line. The factories were run like normal businesses, he said, except that everything was done for a much cheaper price, since the prisoners had basically no rights and worked almost for free.
You know, it's a factory. Companies come there, the police is recruiting factory owners and say, okay, here you can rent the factory, you can rent the workforce, for this you pay and you can produce anything. They produce like toys, remote controlled cars, small model cars. Then clothes were manufactured, shoes, bags, shirts, all kind of thing. Many other electrical things like headphones.
Forced labor is widespread in China. According to a 2019 report, more than 600 Chinese companies used prison labor across 30 provinces and regions that produce everything from dolls to sweaters. China's prison labor industry falls under the regime's judiciary system. It is illegal to import products made using forced labor to the U.S. Since the beginning of this year, U.S. Customs and Border Protection has issued 8 detention orders against Chinese companies that utilized forced labor, barring their goods from entering the country. Most of those products came from Xinjiang in northwest China. It's where the CCP holds about 1.8 million Uyghurs and other Turkic minority groups in over 300 forced labor camps, the largest internment of an ethnic and religious minority since World War II. According to recent reports, the CCP has started to traffic members of those groups to other parts of China, where they are held and forced to work under inhumane conditions. Those facilities manufacture goods for 83 global brands. According to attorney Fred Rockefort, who worked as brand protection consultant on forced labor cases in China, companies shouldn't trust any claims by their Chinese suppliers regarding forced labor. Roeder agrees.
The companies really must follow up. If I put as a company my logo on something, I carry the responsibility. Even if I just license it to somebody else and you should produce it for me, I cannot close my eyes and look the other way and say, okay, I'm legally protected.
He became aware of several products with brand names produced at the prison, though he didn't know who the customer was. A senior research fellow in China studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation warned that soon most Chinese products that rely on low-skilled manufacturing could come from forced labor. In recent years, handwritten messages from alleged forced laborers in China pleading for help were discovered in products in the West. In December of last year, a 6-year-old girl in the UK found a note in a Christmas card saying it had been packed by foreign prisoners who were victims of forced labor at a Shanghai prison. For Roeder, consumers have a responsibility to help end the practice of forced labor.
Don't buy their products. Resist. Go to somebody else who really can show you, okay, we produce fairly, on a fair way, on a fair basis, our products, and even if you have to pay $1 or $2 more for that, just don't mind that because you do something good for mankind and for your own dignity.
Reuters said boycotting companies complicit in forced labor is the only way to make them change their ways. Reporting by Christian Watchin, NTD News, Berlin.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.